Okay, Dana, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Okay, good. We will. I guess we're going to just sort of start chit chatting because I think Paul might be a little late. So thank you for everyone that's sort of coming in, and I wanted to kind of go over a few things that have happened since the last time we had a space. I don't know, when was the last time we had a space, Dana? You're going to need to.
It was like,
You're going to have to.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I'm going to need you to do the like chit chat thing here. So I got some jokes lined up. They're pretty great. They're really good.
No
So
problem. I
okay.
think it was a couple weeks ago, and um, was it Ashley Rinsberg was the last one, right?
Yes, it was another afternoon one, East Coast time.
That was
I
so
guess it was
good.
evening. It was very good.
We should talk about Paul's background while he's not on and being bored by listening to all this stuff
But
about himself. Should we talk a little bit about Paul Thacker?
yeah, we can. But again, these jokes. Okay, just one joke, Dana. Okay,
Go ahead.
because Richard joined, so I gotta do this joke. Okay,
Hi,
so
Richard.
well, he can't because he doesn't have a phone. But
Well, I'm just
so
saying, I can still say
oh
hi, right? He still
yeah.
can hear.
So here's the thing, Dana. What was the big news yesterday? The big news yesterday. What just came out yesterday? It was
Um,
the the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention paper came out in Nature, right? It was a
right.
big deal.
It was a big
And
deal.
yeah, and so what was astounding to me, because we had gone, it started with pangolin, and then it went to raccoon dog, right?
Mhm. Yep.
And you know what it's now, I guess from reading the virologist posts, it turns out, Dana, that it is all caused by a panda.
Who
You know what I'm
knew?
talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who would have thought that it would have been caused by a panda bear? The odds of that are so low. I mean, less than a koala bear causing the pandemic. But I guess we should have known because people have said this was a pandemic. You know what
I
I'm
like
talking about?
Very good. Oh my God, you're doing dad jokes now.
Yep, we are doing dad jokes. The other big news from last week, this is what we get with Paul not here. The other big news from last week, of course, was the database kerfuffle. And I guess, do you have any clue what happened with that? Because I don't.
How many times did I call you this week and say, "Can you explain this to me?" Because I find it completely confusing, and I don't really understand what happened. And I'm going to ask you again if you can explain it.
Nobody can explain it. It turns out that no one has the ability to explain it
Oh my
because
gosh.
it's an impossible to understand story. But it involves somebody that used to be a movie producer and there's like ski videos. Did you see this? I want.
No, I no, I don't. I just can't put all these pieces together. I bet Richard can explain it better
No,
than anybody.
no, Richard. I don't think he can. Frankly, he'll
Mm,
pretend he could, but I don't think he could. What we really need is Ed Hammond to come on and and talk about it. And I've asked Ed to join us for one of these, and hopefully he will, and give us some clarity on what happened there. Um,
okay.
the, the other thing, other news. Are we ready for more news, Dana, from the
Yeah.
last?
Tell me.
Did you see the thing that happened on a much smaller scale? Justin Kinney, he tweeted out. This is what he tweeted out. He tweeted out this. He tweeted out a math equation. He tweeted out 2 + 2 = 4. And would you believe it caused a huge backlash against Justin for tweeting that out?
No,
Did you see that?
no.
No.
Are you kidding me?
No. Oh, it was actually sorry. He said Marburg was caused by a lab leak,
Uh-huh.
and
Oh yeah.
yeah. So not only did that lead to a lot of people getting upset, but it caused a Forbes article to be written about him. Just
Well, it was
a hit
actually a
piece.
Forbes hit piece from what
Yeah,
I
a
remember.
Forbes hit piece.
They do that. In fact, they all do that. And that's one of the things that I want to talk to Paul about today, which is how the media is complicit in all of these narratives being derailed, being created, and why they're doing that. Can you talk a little bit about the Marburg outbreak, and was it the result of uh, a
You
lab leak, or
you
what
you
happened?
Wait, Dana. Yeah.
What?
Wait, I do not want to open up the can of worms again. Of course, it was. Well, it was by all definition. So this is why now, Rich. If Richard is actually listening, he wants us to be using the term research related spillover or research
Research
related incident. Yeah, and
research related incident, that's fine.
yeah,
I can I,
and that
I'm going to
let's
call
do
it that
that,
from
and
now.
then that covers it. And so Yana also made a point about that being the term that we should use. And I know I have been a little bit loose with calling things lab leak, and a lot of people in the public recognize lab leak as, it's easy to understand. But when you see the reaction, of course, of people, having um, well, the
Yeah.
overreaction of people to using that term, I think it might make more sense. Then they'll all agree it was research related caused that.
It
So
takes it takes the sting out of it for people who
I,
can't handle the idea that that's possible, that that's possibly what happened. So
that's right.
what happened with Marburg? Can you discuss it? Because I think there are probably people here that are not following that closely, and it was
Honestly,
very
I
interesting.
don't know exactly the details well enough to say publicly what happened. I'd have to go back and read them. I mean, you just go to Wikipedia. That's the problem.
Well,
Anyone want to talk about Marburg? And anybody? See,
well,
nobody wants to go on record talking about Marburg. No, it was research related. That's it. We all agree. Okay, that's
okay,
fine.
okay,
All we know is it was research related and it happened in Marburg. That's it.
yeah, that's all we know.
And I get it. And apparently people got really sick.
Yeah,
So it's serious stuff.
it is very serious, and there's so much of it, and that's the thing that we're so focused on uh, bringing to light and helping to stop that from happening to
Are
all of
you?
us, because the next one could be worse. Did you watch that interesting Redfield interview?
Which one?
It was like a couple weeks ago, and he
You,
said that the next, he's concerned that the next pandemic will be worse and it will be from a research related incident. He has no doubt that that's what will happen. And he said a lot of very interesting things in that interview about the pandemic and its origins and how they were, covered up. And he was
I didn't.
excluded
I didn't
from
actually see that
conversation.
interview. Where was that interview with?
It's on. You can see it on YouTube. I posted it, and
Oh, okay.
I think Alex Washburn posted it, and I talked to Colin Butler about it. It's an
Hold
interesting.
on. We don't talk about Alex Washburn on this space. Come on now.
Sorry about
We're gonna
that.
get very. We cannot. He's no. Just kidding. We
No,
do.
I
We
think
do.
Alex posted it, and that's why I saw it and watched it, and I thought it was interesting, and it
Okay.
was kind of something that everybody was talking about for a couple of days because it was very interesting, and I don't love him, but I did think that he made some good points.
Whoa, easy there. Why do you not love him? You had disagreements about some of his things, right? We all disagree, right?
I mean, he's kind of shady, but
Who's
we don't need
shady? No.
Redfield. Come on,
Oh,
right?
Redfield. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Alex Washburn.
No, I love Alex. He's great.
Okay.
I would never
My
say that about
bad.
Alex. I like
Please.
Alex much better than I like Redfield.
Okay.
No,
Well,
I have concerns about Redfield, but but I can separate as best as I can. What's good from I'm trying not to throw out the baby with bathwater, as they say, and I thought that the interview was interesting and worth listening to. So I will post it later again, um, if nothing else for you, so that you'll actually
yeah.
I don't know, watch something that I try to get you to watch. Just really difficult.
Well, usually you don't send anything very positive. It's very negative, a lot of what you send. It's
Well,
hard.
I
It makes
understand.
me. I'll go. So for those of you just joining, so Paul Thacker is a investigative journalist. He's going to join us in a little bit. He had a phone call at 1 o'clock. He thought he would get off at 1:30, but he said he might be running a little bit late. And he said, everyone wants to hear you and Dana banter. And he also said, tell Dana happy birthday for me because I know she celebrated a birthday recently. The
I
big
did.
the big number. What is it now?
I'm not.
Oh,
I'm
oh,
not going to reveal it.
oh.
I'm just not
Okay.
going to do that
But
because
can you?
because
That's
I can't win. I'm either too young or too old, and I don't want to hear anything. I just don't want to hear it. I get enough trolling about, when I say wear an N95. I get, why do you like face diapers? You're an idiot. You should die as soon as possible. I just don't want to hear anything else. I'm not going to say anything. I can't. I'll just tell you in
but
private.
can, okay. Well, that took a dark turn. I was just wanting to wish you happy birthday. I didn't want you to
Oh,
talk
so
about your death
sorry.
threats. But
That's what happens. But thank you. I appreciate it. And I had a really nice birthday and I went to Joshua Tree. And it is just so beautiful to be out in nature and like not think about bio warfare for, I don't know, 6 hours. It's awesome.
very now, will you tell everyone, because this actually is a misconception. There's more than one Joshua tree, right? It's not just a single tree. It's actually a type of tree.
It's like isn't it a yucca?
It is not a tree. That's actually correct.
Right,
It's not a tree. It's a yucca.
right,
And it actually isn't. There are more than one of them, but they always
right.
just say Joshua Tree. But that's the park, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a Joshua Tree. It's a national park and it's quite spectacular. And the weather is beautiful right now. And it's just a great thing to do if you can get out west to the desert. The
So
desert is a crazy place.
so Dana, I know you're trying to avoid me asking this question because I brought your birthday up, but I want to know, because everyone here may not know that you are good friends. Maybe not. You're friends with Celine Dion, right? And that's
Well, I
and
wrote two songs for I
right,
wrote two songs for her record, and
right.
yeah, and we have the same birthday, so that was a fun thing to talk about
Oh,
because I heard that she's kind of into astrology and stuff before I met her. So I told her when I met her, guess what? We have the same birthday, and she said, "Are you joking me?" That was
right. That's your imitation of her. So
that's my invitation.
let me
She's
just
like,
point out,
yeah.
on average, each of us has written one song for Celine Dion. Isn't that
Oh,
amazing?
absolutely. I mean, it's not a big deal
That's
that that
pretty cool.
happened at
Not a
all
big
for
deal.
me in the music business. No, it's not a
It's
big deal.
not. So, okay, I apologize. I'm going to go to Paul. Let's go to Paul right now. In terms of, I'm
Is
going to introduce him because he's going to hop on here soon.
is
Um,
okay, good.
I
Because
think.
I'm sure people really are like,
No,
why did they do this to us? Like we were coming for Thacker and we got Bryce and Parrish
I don't
wearing.
know. Ray seems pretty happy out there. We're getting some love from Ray. Yeah, Ray likes this. He's like,
Oh, good. Thank
keep
you, Ray.
Paul off. We want just Dana and Bryce in his embodiment as the Biosafety Now Twitter account, which, by the way, took a lot of heat this week. A lot of heat, Dana.
Well, that
You
means
know,
that we're doing something right. I mean,
it
honestly,
does.
when no everybody ignores me, unless I say something that they really, really, really don't want to come. Like if I said something incorrect, everybody would just whatever. But as soon as you say something true, then a certain amount of certain kinds of people don't want the public to find out or consider. You get a lot of pushback. I like it. I welcome
Now,
it. I grew up with a gangster mother. So this to me is like, eh, I don't even, my heart rate doesn't even go up.
so um, okay, sorry. Let me see here. What's this? Oh, sorry. I was just clicking something. What I was going to say is, it actually, the heat that it took does kind of, bring us into the topic that Paul's going to talk about, which is the notion when you bring up the idea of biodefense and then you say bioweapon, bioterror, that's where you get a lot of pushback. And so what happened, for those of you that aren't aware, is I I have posted a video of a woman from the Roxbury Safety Net, which is an organization in Boston that has been holding the Boston University Needle. This is a BSL-4 facility that's
Hmm.
in Boston, to account, to try to get transparency and have some, want to know what's going on in that facility, because it's built in this neighborhood, and it was put there because it's a low income neighborhood, and they didn't have the ability to rally up enough support to not have BU build it there. So she spoke and she said, which is an incorrect thing, which is not correct. She said that BSL-3 and BSL-4 only have bioweapons being, studied there, which is not true. But the reaction to it was quite vicious, I think, and it had nothing to do with curiosity from scientists who were trying to, correct that error. But instead, they wanted to make sure that that she was framed as a lunatic, as a complete moron that didn't know what she was talking about, which really offended me, and I'm sure it offended a lot of people that saw those interactions, especially given that once some of the scientists were given the opportunity to, maybe tone it down a little bit, they justified their actions as if that was the appropriate response to them being attacked by a member of the public. So we
Yeah.
will hopefully, I do believe we're going to have members of the Roxbury Safety Net come on and discuss that whole incident with us. And I, honestly would like it to be a productive conversation. We have discussed actually inviting some of the people that got
Attack.
very upset. Yeah.
They were horrible. I actually had a scientist who's not really engaged in Twitter, but has an account that saw that whole thing play out, text me something, and I posted it, said something like, real scientists would never behave this way. It's just such a disgrace and an embarrassment to me as a scientist to treat people this way, to treat the public this way. It's stunning, really, for me as a non-scientist, as a curious onlooker. I am shocked by the way these people treat the public and discredit really very important questions and very earnest questions and concerns.
So without getting into too much detail on it, I think the context, which, first of all, everyone also was very upset with the Biosafety Now Twitter account for not providing the appropriate context. Obviously, I'm being a jerk while discussing it because I still obviously am very irritated about it, upset. But the context is that in Roxbury, they, as I said, they're dealing with the Boston University needle, and they were really, really scared and concerned when last October the BU needle had a paper published that described gain of function research.
I mean, I think we should just get into a little bit of the back. I mean, there's basically a biosafety lab in the middle of Boston, right? I mean, and they're working with some pretty serious germs.
Well, that's the other point. Do we actually know what they're working with? I don't know. Maybe that actually is public. I don't know. And that would be something that they could discuss with us when they come on. And here is Paul.
Guess what? Our guest of honor has arrived.
He has arrived.
That's awesome.
Paul, you there?
Yeah.
Now he muted himself.
Nope, he's here.
I'm here.
Yeah,
Sorry about that, guys.
Okay. No problem.
Sorry.
We were just talking about, we're trying to guess how much bioweapon research goes on at BSL-3, BSL-4 labs. And just to end the thing we were talking about real quick. So it turns out, according to Richard, he estimated 20 to 40% of research at BSL-3s would qualify as dual-use research of concern.
Right.
Now again, that's a word that some will take to mean bioweapons. But again, this conversation we will certainly be coming back to over and over again. And then 80%, he said, at BSL-4s. But Paul, thank you very much. So let me introduce Paul. He is a investigative journalist.
An award-winning investigative
Has
journalist.
he won awards? Is this true?
Yes.
And award losing. And
award-winning and losing.
And
Paul
finalizing. And finalist.
Very good. Yeah. Paul is definitely a star in the field of investigative journalism. Okay, go on. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just had to give him a little bit of appropriate. He needs the appropriate accolades because you're not in the entertainment business like me, right? Where like We got to make the right intro
Okay.
for our guest stars. Go on. Sorry.
Now, Paul. So one of the things that I actually didn't know about you, and then I went to your Wikipedia page
Right.
because that's, of course, where we get all our
Oh,
information.
That's where everything's true.
You're
Wikipedia.
you're a veteran, right?
Yeah, so I'm the first guy in my family to go to college. So I went to the Army to get money to go to college. And the Army is also known as the poor man's Peace Corps because you get to go abroad. And so I got to go what was called at the time West Germany, which is now Germany, and served over there, which is really fun because you're 18 years old, you can go out to clubs and you can go out to bars. Yeah, so that was fun.
But you were in the Gulf War.
Yeah, so the first first Gulf War, which was actually pretty short, actually. So I was in part of the first infantry division, which was the group that the way that war worked is, Saddam had built up this defensive perimeter along the southern part of Iraq. So we poured in and set up along that in Saudi Arabia, and then the Marines pushed up along the coast, which drew the Iraqi forces down into by the Gulf, and then the first ID and a couple other units came up around and did what's called a pincher movement. So we just came around the side and hit them in the ass. So and it was and as you might remember, they did not fare well. They didn't do very well in that engagement.
Since I just brought it, did you actually have any exposure to chemical weapons or anything over there?
So
Or is that,
I don't. So there's a weird things with this Persian Gulf War syndrome that happened, and I'm not. I didn't follow it all that carefully. So some people thought there was some thought that it was because of these experimental vaccines that we were given, and then some thought it was maybe some. Wait, I don't think it's vaccines. Experimental vaccines were given. We were given some experimental pharmaceuticals. It's so funny because I remember when we had to take them, we were all lined up. And it was mandatory we take them, and we all landed up. And I remember the company commander came out and said, these are experimental, blah, blah, blah. Everyone has them. We're all going to we were in formation, and I palmed mine. So I didn't take it. I was 19, but I was not stupid.
Wow.
I
Smart. What were they for? Do you know what they were
Well,
for?
there was a lot of concerns about chemical weapons, so nerve gas. And I think the Marines actually hit nerve gas, which would have been in some mines that were along there. And then they were also, they had some nerve gas warheads. There's just a lot of concern about different things. Some people think that what the Persian Gulf War, the whole thing's about, was all the oils, all the oil that was burning. The oil was burning, it blotted out the sky. They set all these oil derricks on fire when they retreated, and so the sky was being blotted out because, there's huge smoke going forever. It was a huge natural disaster.
What happened to your comrades that took the experimental drugs?
Well, I don't know. You have to understand, I went over there, my unit didn't go over there. I was part of a group of one guy out of each unit had to go there. And so we all came over as a big group of guys, and we got parceled out to different groups. So I was part of a unit that I did not belong to. I was at Fort Polk and then joined a unit for 3 months. And then, they were looking for warm bodies to fill in into different positions. And then when the war was over, we all just cycled back to our units back home. So those guys, I don't even know, I have no clue what happened to those guys. I was with them for 3-4 months, and then, I never saw them again.
Yeah, interesting.
I did then want to go to just fast forward to your role. So you worked as a lead investigator for the U.S. Senate Committee on Finance under Chuck Grassley, who at that time, wasn't he 104 at that time, or was he?
Yeah, it's funny. He just keeps going. Well, back then, when I was there from 2007 to 2011, like you'd get his schedule in the morning. You get your schedule every day, like where he's going to be. He's up at like 5:30 in the morning. Like a guy in his 70s up at 5:30 in the morning, like on a run. I mean, he
My
is an early to
God.
bed, early to rise guy. He was
Really?
also home like by 8 o'clock and probably in bed. He was not one of those. He's never been one of those late night go to fundraiser kind of guys. He's pretty kind of work and that's it. He'd also fall asleep sometimes during meetings. I remember. So
That's funny.
yeah. So like
So you,
he just he's just constantly going. And it's funny too because Baucus, who was the Democrat on that committee, he was kind of the same way. Baucus never took I didn't know this, but like at the time, like he never took the elevators in the Senate buildings. He walked up the stairs because he also ran those ultra marathons. So, he was just kind of an exercise freak.
I feel so lazy right now.
I know.
Honestly.
I know.
During this.
After we get off,
I feel terrible.
after we get off doing this thing, I'm going to go out down to the bar and have a couple of drinks and watch a game. So there you go.
That sounds good. That sounds
Yeah.
fun. Well, so I realized that you were at that time investigating financial links between physicians and pharmaceutical companies,
Right.
and conflicts of interest, and that is obviously very interesting to me given my background. And I'm curious about some of the things you exposed. I know that you led an investigation on the drug Avandia,
Right.
which made type 2 diabetes. What did you find, and what was the result of some of your investigations?
So what had happened is before I had even joined the committee, before I joined the committee, I had been doing investigations of corruption in science and medicine, mostly but I was at a science journal called Environmental Science and Technology. And I've been doing a lot of work uncovering corruption and climate change, oil, fossil fuel guys, front groups being paid off to attack climate scientists, fake journals to say that, that chemicals weren't dangerous. There's a movie that came out a few years ago with Mark. I can't remember what it's called, but it's about this guy who uncovered all these problems with this chemical called PFOA. There's this lawyer. Like I wrote a guy named Rob Ballot. I wrote the very first story about these things on PFOA, which involved this Science for Hire group, which was going to do research to show that PFOA is actually safe, and actually maybe good for your heart. So I've been doing a lot of that stuff. And when I went to the committee, they were doing similar things in pharmaceuticals, and it wasn't that difficult for me to jump over because it was, it involved doctors, not scientists, and it was the FDA, not the EPA or any of these other science agencies. So it was really simple. And it's the same thing going on. It was like, although at the medical level, it's way more complicated, than it is in any other field of science. There's this idea now. It's so funny. I was talking to these issues on COVID, a couple of physicians and epidemiologists. When the pandemic started, all these climate scientists started jumping up and down about like, well, this is disinformation, this is that. And it's like, I mean, these guys literally have no clue about medicine, and they all think that they've figured out like what disinformation is and how disinformation functions, and they have a very naive, childlike understanding of these issues.
That's
because,
right. That's right.
They understand that in climate change, oh wow, well, they paid off these PR guys to say that climate change isn't real or the Earth's not heating up, and in medicine, it's way more complicated than that. I mean, this stuff starts off super complex. There's professional societies that are paid off. AAAS never was being paid off by the fossil fuel industry to say that climate change wasn't real. You have these things happening in medicine, though, like the amount of corruption and the complications that are in medicine are just really, really endemic, that it makes it really difficult sometimes to even understand what's true. What to trust.
Go ahead.
So
you did this incredible interview with Chris Newby recently.
Yeah.
That was honestly one of the best pieces I have read.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks.
Ever about. It was so brilliant. And Chris Newby is also an investigative journalist. She wrote a book that was very well regarded, called Bitten. I think it's something. It's like the byline is like The Secret History of Lyme and Biological Warfare, or something like
Right.
that. I mean, and she has she's a very credible reporter, and the whole you and I connected early on because of the Lyme cover up
Right.
and the chronic Lyme stuff, and you were so knowledgeable, not for being not a Lyme patient. You were extremely knowledgeable about it. I was so impressed. And Chris's interview with you was just honestly
Oh, well, thanks.
jaw-dropping.
So what had happened is when I came over to the committee, this was back when Vioxx, which was this painkiller, it was discovered that Vioxx, that Merck had covered up problems with the drug. And so the committee, the Senate Finance Committee, so Grassley had an investigative group that I was on, and they had already uncovered the fact that, so when Vioxx, the scandal first started with Vioxx, the first question they asked was, well, how did FDA approve this? So they went back to the FDA panel that approved it, and what they found when they looked at all the doctors that were there is they all, like, so many of them had ties to the pharmaceutical industry. They're like, okay, what the hell's going on here? How are all these guys with financial ties to pharma getting on these FDA panels that approve this crappy product? And so this idea was already set sort of like in, the minds of the committee when I came on. And so what, sort of a long story short, we started looking at a lot of physicians, academic physicians who, I just called a bunch of reporters at the big newspapers, who are the corrupt doctors that take money all the time? Like, who are they? And a lot of these names were known. Some other academics, some journal editors, some activists out there. And it's like, I created a collection of like, okay, we think all these guys are taking money. And so I sent letters to all the universities saying, turn over all the financial reporting requirements this guy's filled out. Turn it all over to us. And then at the same time, we figured out the top 10 pharma companies, and we sent letters to them saying, here's a collection of physicians. How much money have you paid them? And it was a really simple thing. Like, here's what you said you reported to the university about payments from pharmaceutical companies. Here's what the pharma said they gave you. You may be surprised to learn that what pharma said they gave these doctors was a lot more than what these doctors told the universities that pharma had given to them.
Yeah.
And then simultaneously, these academic physicians had NIH grants, and there were reporting requirements under the regulations for extramural funding through the NIH. And so I just, started sending letters to, at the time, NIH leader was Ilya Serhouni, saying, what's going on? Like, these universities don't know how much money these guys are taking. Are you monitoring this yourself? And of course, we knew they weren't. And so just kept rolling that out. And it was so funny at the time, it was just like, oh, well, this is a bad apple. And it's like, how many bad apples are there? Like there's a goddamn bad barrel, know.
Well, that whole story, I think people don't know about the Merck hit list that came out in that deposition in Australia. And also, do you remember the fake medical journals that they put out to support Vioxx?
You understand, there are, so I didn't know about the fake Merck journals, but I uncovered so many, they're called vanity journals. They're these journals that there's a lot of them in medicine. There's a lot of them some of them in toxicology as well. There were so many of them in psychiatry, for instance, like a lot, and then there's also it's just certain areas of science or medicine where the physician acts as a gatekeeper to make two decisions. First off, is there some sort of pathology? So it's like yes or no. And of course, the pharma companies are always pushing for yes, he's sick. This is not subclinical. This is like he has something that needs to be treated. And then the next thing is, and the treatment is our product. And that's whether it's for depression or for, spinal pain, so it's like, if it's depression, yes, he's depressed and give him our antidepressant. If it's, a back surgery, it's like, yes, his pain must be dealt with through surgery, not through therapy. And you must use our products and put as much metal in this guy's back as as you possibly can, all the screws, all the, fusions that are needed, so it's a pretty, clear process what was going on, and so and then with Avandia, Avandia, what had happened was, it's really funny. When we launched the investigation on Avandia, we knew that there was this study coming out showing that the product was causing MIs and maybe cardiovascular death. So I had the letter, went out the door, and when we got the documents, a couple of things that I found out. First off, the head of research at GlaxoSmithKline knew that so when the NEJM would publish a study to show that the product was bad, one of the peer reviewers at NEJM leaked it back to Glaxo, and I got that fax. This is a guy at University of Texas, San Antonio. And it was so funny when I called him up to talk, because like I realized I had the fax, and I put together like, wait, what's this fax? Like, wait, when did the study come out? And then, called him up, it was like, just do what I normally do. It's like, hey, how you doing? Paul Thacker here, like talk. Within like about 30 seconds, like, I did it. I was like, what? He's like, I did it. I know where you're calling me. I did it. I gave it to them.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it was really a weird moment because I was on the phone with one of the investigative counsels, because we never like get one person on the phone. We'd always have two. And he grabbed my arm and he leans over, he says, this guy might commit suicide. And I was like, oh shit. If like we call him up and this guy goes and kills himself, like that's going to be in the New York Times. So he was like very calm and like backed off. He ended up being fired from his job. And so that was one thing we found. The other thing was that what Glaxo had done is they had gotten a leak from this peer reviewer of the study. They then gave it to their statistician who went through the study, said it was found, and they immediately drafted a press release to say the study was bullshit. The study had not even been published yet. They already had a press release ready to go to say the study was wrong. All this happened before the study was even published. So we had the entire document trail.
Oh my God.
The person who mentioned at one point in time that, was looking through the data, like, oh my God, there's like an increased risk for myocardial infarction and for cardiovascular death, was a guy named Monsef Slaoui. Which that's not a very common name, right? It's an Arabic name or North African name. He ended up being put in charge of Operation Warp Speed to bring the COVID vaccines online. Oh yeah. Monsef Slaoui knew that this drug was bad. He then turned around and lied to Congress when he was appeared before Waxman's committee. And when we released the report that I wrote a couple of years later, Glaxo freaked out. I heard back through a friend at the Journal, and they did not want him back in the States because they thought he was going to be indicted for lying to Congress. And then, so like, it kind of disappeared. This is, 2011. And then suddenly here it is, 2019, 2020. And I'm looking down, like, you don't forget a name, Monsef Slaoui, it's
Sure.
It's not like, a doctor named Jacob Siegelman, there's like 10 of those in St. Louis, I mean, so like, it's like a unique name. And so I'm just like, oh God, no, not Monsef. He's back.
Wow.
Yeah.
You must have been shocked. I mean, that is actually shocking.
Well, I wrote it up for Daily Beast, like his whole history, like who he actually was, that Trump had picked him. But it's like, it's not just him. Like, he was kept around, even though it was known what he had done. Like, the NIH kept him around, kept him on panels and on advisory boards. Collins and Fauci kept him around, because in their world, he's considered an expert on vaccines. In my world, he's considered a guy who lies to Congress about the danger of products,
Yeah. Yes.
Can I point something out?
Yeah.
So I've talked to Paul a little bit now, just over the last couple of days, and I just would recommend never be investigated by Paul. That's my recommendation.
That's my advice.
I would not.
I
would not want me
be
going after me. I can tell you that.
No, you really want to just stay out of your way.
There's like,
because it's not fun.
Like, I mean, I would not want me going after me. There's a couple other reporters that I know of that I'm just like, I mean, David Armstrong at ProPublica now, I just told him one time, like, I would not want you going after me. Like, you're really good.
Oh, I forgot when I introduced you. I actually forgot. I gotta plug your Substack.
Oh yeah.
People
So it's
follow your
Yeah, it's
Substack.
called the
Can you?
Disinformation Chronicle. And the reason why I started is because sort of early on in the pandemic, I was having hard time writing for people because, I've written on all these different topics where there's like been corruption in science, like climate change, toxics, uh, you know, um, pharmaceuticals. And it's really hard, like, to get editors to understand. I'm like, you don't understand, like, this PR firm that you're seeing, like, that they're the ones who told you that, this food is not dangerous. They're also the one, do you know what they were doing? Like, also, like, that these antidepressants are good. Like, it was the same person, but like so much of this stuff gets siloed. It's like, this is a
Yeah.
pharmaceutical thing. This is like, and I was like, I don't really do that. Like, I work on these issues of corporate corruption and, like, PR, a lot of stuff. And so I just had to start my own thing because it
So,
was
Paul,
hard to
that's
explain all
also
these
why
things.
you were once, apparently, you were once like super progressive, right? And now you're hardcore right wing. Is that my understanding?
I've never had,
I
like, I mean, I've always been, like, I think kind of unaffiliated.
I
And the only time I ever,
no, I'm kidding. You're labeled.
oh,
You're labeled.
oh,
People try to deplatform you.
well,
That's what I
I
meant.
mean, I think it just depends. Like, when I was writing on environmental stuff, then I was a left winger, and then when I started working on corruption in pharmaceuticals and I was working for Grassley, then I was a right winger. Or why does this guy have, or actually there's actually, there was a piece, I think this guy now he's the conservative writer for the Daily Beast. He wrote this piece about me. I can't remember who he was writing for at the time, that I was this crazy left winger working for Grassley, and that I was on his investigation into, Grassley had this investigation into corrupt ministries, and that I was running it, and that I love to go after Christian pastors. And I'm just like, it was funny because, like, I wasn't involved in that investigation at all. So I think a lot of these things are just like whatever people need to do to, like, not deal with facts.
Yeah. None of these things should be political. And that's the thing that really strikes me as you're talking about all the areas that you've been involved in exposing and reporting on, is that they should be apolitical, and that people make them political so that they can discredit the cause,
Well, to
discredit
some
the journalists
degree,
covering them.
they are political. Like, if you look at, like, climate change, for instance, I mean, the science on that is fairly clear going back, like 100 years, but
Yeah.
in many ways, it's sort of like tobacco, right? It sort of became political because there's financial interests. And these financial interests
I
are
mean
like
the Democratic versus Republican.
oh,
I don't
yeah,
mean. I know there's lots of politics in this. I just mean like the literal
Oh.
calling you a left wing or right wing, this or that. It's just crazy to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think people just need to, like, I think some people have to, they have to figure out, like, how to deal with, the thing that we're dealing with right now is people are incapable of dealing with facts that don't fit the way they want the world to be. And so as soon as they don't understand that, then it's like, oh, well, that's a bunch of right-wing bullshit, or that's just a bunch of left-wing bullshit. So, like, it's just like,
Yeah.
and they're not going to deal with the reality of, here's a set of documents. This guy did this, I mean, we're still in this place right now. I mean, the latest thing coming out was like this entire Russiagate, nonsense has been totally dismantled. It's taken years, but, like, the papers ran with this shit for years. And it's so funny because, the vast majority of people I have friends with on Facebook, at least, are from DC, lots of reporters, lots of, so, like, you're talking like, 95% Democrats. And when CGR published this piece about the terrible reporting that went into creating this Russiagate narrative bullshit, I saw nobody post that on their Facebook page. Meanwhile, I wake up today, Trump's been indicted, and, like, I open up Facebook and there's like 6 people I see, like, gleefully, like, Trump's been indicted. I mean, so it's just like, people look for the news that tell them, what the way they want to see the world. It's just how it works in America now.
I agree, and I wasn't going to jump to this, but your latest Fauci piece really speaks to that, because there's just a huge amount. There are a lot of people that have a lot of vested interest in protecting him, no matter what he does, and no matter what he's done, and no matter what he's funded. And it's been really shocking to watch this whole thing play out. And you just wrote a really good piece about it. I don't know if you want to jump into talking a little bit about your reporting there, but it was really interesting.
So I don't.
Wait,
Yeah.
Paul, can I actually can you go back to the first one, because I'm really fascinated by the fact that Fauci's getting now thrown under the bus. This goes, Dana, to what we were talking about before and the whole
Yeah.
biodefense thing. How
Yeah.
at all costs that's going to be protected.
Right.
So now, so yeah, can you? I'm sorry, Dana. Can you go back to the first piece, because it sort of bleeds into then. Now Fauci's getting thrown under the bus a little bit,
Right.
but they're still not. They're still protecting the biodefense stuff. So
That's
your
right.
first thing. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So,
So,
the politicians ignore NIH ties with Wuhan lab to
oh,
protect
yeah.
biodefense
Right.
contract
Yeah.
racket? That's the piece that I think Bryce
Yeah.
is referencing. It's excellent.
So,
It's on your Disinformation Chronicle.
so what happened is sort of the ProPublica came out with this piece back like late October of last year, and it was based upon a Senate Help report. So Senate Help is the committee that oversees a lot, NIH and stuff like that. They released a report, but it was a minority report by the Republicans. And as soon as it came out, both the report and ProPublica, all this jumping up and down and screaming, blah, 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 like people who just don't give a shit, like who just, just know that they couldn't possibly be in a lab accident. I thought there were some legitimate criticisms about, one of this interpreter that played this. It wasn't really like a big deal in the report itself, but like was a big deal in the ProPublica story, because the ProPublica story tried to do oh, we're going to do characters. This is a character-driven story, So they did this silly character-driven narrative, and opened themselves up to a lot of legitimate criticism. But about so this comes out late October, and then around mid-December, so it's not like a couple weeks before Christmas, I got a call from someone who is in Washington circles and runs in these very circles. And the person was pointing out to me, it was like, did you read that report? And I was like, no, I glanced through it, pretty quickly. And I'd had a chance to read the ProPublica story. I just kind of knew, I was following, everyone just freaking out on Twitter. And I was I was adding in my licks on the case, oh, you guys just don't like it because it says this, I didn't really read the story, whatever. So, and the person was like, did you look through the report? Did you see at all the name Anthony Fauci or gain of function or National Institutes of Health? And I was like, well, I didn't really read that carefully. Why? He's like, because they're not in there. I'm like, really? I'm like, well, what the hell's going on? I was like, there had been rumors floating for months back in DC that report, and then I heard this from other people, was designed specifically to not look at Anthony Fauci or the NIH, and to redirect all attention at Wuhan. And this was done for very political purposes, because, first off, Democrats did not want anyone to look at Anthony Fauci because he's their little hero. And also, Senator Burr is a big biodefense guy, which, I didn't know at the time when this person was telling me this stuff. But then I looked it all up and found it all out. And by the way, in case you didn't know this, Senator Burr is from, do you know which state Senator Burr is from?
No.
North Carolina.
Oh, that is interesting.
So who's a researcher in North Carolina that's doing gain of function research?
Right.
Ralph Barrick.
Of course, and his team.
Right. Mm-hmm. And who was Ralph Barrick's boss? So they became EIC for a major science journal.
Who was that?
Holden Thorpe.
Holden. I knew it. That tweet the other day. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's so embarrassing.
Oh yeah.
He's such an
Holden Thorpe, who embarrasses himself constantly on Twitter, who publishes garbage papers, who oversees John Cohen, who writes completely obnoxious trash for Science Magazine, Mr. SciComm himself. And so I just
it's propaganda.
Right.
It's just propaganda.
So we're just walking through all this stuff. And so I was out, it was late at night, I was out, I'm 6 hours ahead of you guys, on the East Coast. When I took that call, it was 10 o'clock. That was afternoon for that person. So next day I wake up and I pull the report down. I'm like, huh. And I started doing searches. I'm like, yeah, there's no Anthony Fauci. There's no gain of function. And I started looking for other ideas of gain of function, virus research or whatever. And National Institutes of Health was only mentioned in passing, just as reference, And then I pulled down the ProPublica piece and I started looking for the same thing. I'm like, shit, it's not here either. I'm like, oh God, all she did was she just parroted back this report, and I'm like, huh,
Yeah.
like this is weird,
Yeah.
So, then I started calling around to people who had advised on the report, who I'd heard may have, and one person told me that Cadlick had decided that like none of this stuff was going to be in there. Another person said Burr.
Wait, hey,
Yeah.
Paul, this is important because can you tell people who Robert Cadlick is?
Okay, so Robert,
because
yeah.
now it's coming up. And
So Robert Cadlick is has just left the Senate, like actually last week, I think. He was a long-term Senate staffer / biodefense lobbyist / biodefense, like a guy inside inside the executive branch. He's also I'm not certain of this. I think he's written a lot of the legislation on biodefense. I think if you go back and look, you'll find like his work in either the House or the Senate.
In the anthrax, like I thought he had some. I don't want to make any accusation. Was there? Do you know something about him and a company involved in like anthrax vaccines?
So Democrats have been going after him pretty hard. You'll see articles in the Post, articles in Politico for his ties on a biodefense lobbyist. You may remember a company named Emergent. There was a vaccine.
Yes, that's right.
There's a vaccine manufacturer that got a big grant, federal grant.
That's right.
That then shut down in Baltimore because it was like crappy manufacturing practices. I think had been a former client of his, and the person who called me at the time told me that they put this together because they had been invited to a Christmas party and were looking around at this lobby shop, and it's like, these are all Catholic people, like, and they're all doing biodefense lobbying. Like, what the hell's going on? And so they just kind of put together like. And then it's like, okay, now I understand what's going on with this report now. Then it started like kind of to make sense. There's a big issue with former staffers. It's not something that I could have done, that I didn't do, but like that I could have done. If you play your cards right, you can take a position off of one of these committees and parlay that into a very, very well-paying job. I can tell you right now, when I was in the Senate, one of the staffers for Senator Cole, who's now gone, who's a Democrat from Wisconsin, she shut down an investigation looking into corruption with the AARP. Now, I know this because I was friends with the other people on that staff, and they told me this when we were out. Like, they were looking into this corruption at AARP. She came in and shut it down. Well, guess who became AARP's lobbyist when she cycled off the Hill? Making probably $500,000 a year. So you plus yourself up from making maybe 120 to making, maybe 530, my boss, who's chief investigator, used to call it getting the extra zero on your paycheck. Like that's how you kind of cycle off the hill. So there's a lot of money here to be made from people who, cycle off the hill. And you may be shocked to learn that Burr is now a biodefense lobbyist at DLA Piper. Took two of the people who worked on BARDA with him. They're now over at DLA Piper. It's just kind of understood that like this is kind of the way, the system works in Washington. I didn't do that because I pissed a lot of people off. So like, no one. I was told specifically from someone who I think was at Covington that this guy's not coming downtown because I embarrassed too many of their lawyers, embarrassed too many of their lobbyists, so, but which was fine. Cause I was not, like a little kid, like I'm going to be like a fireman. I'm going to be a police officer. I'm going to be like a pharma biotech lobbyist. Like that was not like my vision of myself. So, yeah. So
is Barrett protected by Burr or the Republicans or what do you think?
I have no clue like what's going on. I can just tell you that like, he's not, I don't know how his lab has not been raided by now. Like, I don't understand that like at all. I will tell you one thing about Barrick. He is actually one of the few guys who actually is smart and who knows what he's doing in this area. Like he's the guy who I've heard like who actually is the genius. Like he really is like he's like the real, he's not a Xi Zhang Li who just like, takes other people's, processes and then, rips it off, and then starts doing her own research at the WIV. She's not, he's not Angela Rasmussen who hops on Twitter and starts yammering all the time about things she doesn't know anything about. He's a guy who really
Right.
knows how to do bench work, and has probably invented a lot. He's got patents on some of these techniques. He's a kind of a genius. He's like the real deal when it comes to doing virus research.
He's been pretty quiet. He's been pretty quiet.
Because he's smart.
Publicly.
Like, he's not an idiot. Like, he's not hopping on Twitter, like a lot of these other knuckleheads, like, Greg Gonzalez, Peter Hotez, Gavin Yamey, all these guys just running their mouths about things they don't know anything about, just needing to hear themselves talk. Like, this guy, he knows what he's doing. He's like, Fauci's the same way, right? Fauci's not like getting on Twitter, running his mouth all the time. He's very carefully placing himself, in Fauci-friendly media outlets to get his voice out.
Well, he claims that he doesn't pay attention to social media, which of course is not true.
Well, let's just say that he also testified to that under oath, and there may or may not be documents that show he perjured himself when he said that. So we'll just wait and see how these documents come out. So.
So talk to us about the 88 billion. Everybody's asking about the 88 billion Biden.
I was just trying to understand. I was like, how much money is there? Because it was the same thing. Like, I was looking at pharmaceuticals. At the end of going after all these doctors and getting this physician payment sunshine bill passed and changing NIH conflict of interest rules, I was kind of like, well, why did we do this? Because when I was leaving, and so we went to OMB, went to a couple of places, and we found out that pharma is about 10% of healthcare spending. 10 to 15%. Now, that's in both private and in public plans. And it's very similar also in Canada, like people have told me. So it's not the biggest spending in healthcare, but it's a sizable amount of spending, and there's a lot of corruption in it, So, like, that's part of the reason why we focused on it. So I was just like, as I was like finishing up this article, I was kind of like, well, how much money is here? Like, what's going on? And so I just started looking around, and I saw that press release from the White House last year talking about, what is a historic level of biodefense spending, is I think what the press release said from Biden, on biodefense. Now, I was just talking to someone the other day, and I was like, the future is biodefense. They're pouring money into it left and right. They've been passing all these bills to get more and more spending on biodefense. And what someone told me was they was looking at it and they're like, this thing's a contract racket. It's basically, if you look at like Burr's statement, he talks about for the vaccines and therapeutics, these government, private partnerships. Well, what does that mean? Like, that doesn't mean that's a contract, right? That's what that means. That's it. Someone put out a contract and people bid on it and someone got the contract. And so the way these contracts work is, contracts and grants go out to fund this virus research where they go out and collect these viruses, and then they take them back to these labs and study them and see like, well, gee, what if we do this to it? Like, and it gets super dangerous. Like, what will that do? Like, oh, and let's make a vaccine to it now, and
exactly. So that people don't realize this connection. This is huge what you're saying right now. It's really
so then they make
pharma is basically in on it.
Yeah, and pharma's in on it. Like, if you go back and look, like, I never understood why Gates was so involved in all this stuff. When I was about 2 years ago, when I did a series of stories for the BMJ, and I was just looking through all this stuff, and I couldn't find like an infectious disease expert in Britain who was not funded by Gates. I was like, all these guys are being funded by Gates. Like, what's going on? Like, what is Gates doing here? He's funding all this virus research, and he's funding all this vaccine production stuff. So they're like, okay, here's the problem. Well, here's the solution. And sometimes they're making solutions preemptively for things that don't even exist. It's just like,
right. Exactly.
It's like, hey, here's this snake. It's dangerous. Well, what if this snake could suddenly spit venom and fly through the air? Like, we need something to protect you from flying snakes. It's like, snakes don't fly. Like, what are you talking about? But what if they did?
Yeah.
Like, wait, what?
It's unbelievable because we have like COVID and nothing, nothing. We still have really no really no adequate treatments, and it's like all this money, and for what?
Well, one of the things that's kind of in the background in all of this is this that I don't think a lot of people are not, like, because people are seeing like parts and pieces of all this stuff, is all this sort of disinformation infrastructure that's been like, created and, sort of built over the last like 6 to 7 years. And that's played a really important part in the pandemic to sort of shut people down and tell them to shut up and not talking about certain things in medicine, but in other areas as well. And, in part it's because if you sort of look back, right, the way the mainstream media functions is it's a way for people in power to get their message out, right? Mm-hmm. And so like that was fine. It's always worked like that traditionally. And, there's a great piece by, I'm blanking on the guy's name at MIT, the theorist there, he was talking to this BBC guy, and he said, like, you couldn't think those thoughts because if you thought those thoughts, you wouldn't be sitting in the chair you're in. Basically, like, you would not be a BBC person if you reported on certain things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of how the media has functioned. And then what's happened with the internet is it's allowed, like suddenly, like, these new websites can go up, like left-wing, right-wing, feminist websites, like any little like tiny thing you want to do, like, gay Jews for Palestine, it's just like, wait, what? Like you can create all these tiny little splinter groups can have their own little message to get out there, Yeah. And so, that's created problems because now you have people, especially if they're good at getting documents or, with all this, open source stuff out there, like, oh, wait, guess what happened? Like, when this thing happened on this date, like, that's also when, DHS was there. Like, that's weird. That's a weird coincidence, so people can start making connections in ways that maybe the mainstream media doesn't report on, And so what you needed to do then was, if you're getting your message out through the New York Times and the Post and ABC News and NBC News, but there's this crap popping up on this other website, well, you have to get rid of that. And so that's how you create this disinformation infrastructure to sort of shoot down these people who aren't, on board with the narrative. And we've seen very clearly, like, a lot of things have been labeled that, like, were obviously ended up like, surprise, not true. Like, hey, there's no natural immunity. Like, wait, what? Like, I remember I first heard that, I was like, but I studied, like, there was like, it was only like a day or two, but like, immunology. I'm like, I think that, like, that's how, like, I was looking up, like, wait, what is a natural immunity? What is this? I'm like, that's how this immune system works. Like, wait, what? Like crazy stuff like that, or like the pandemic couldn't have possibly started from a lab. Like, I remember the first time I heard that, it was because it was in late 2020. And I'd seen something that said it was a conspiracy theory to say that it could have started in a lab in Wuhan. And I'm like, that's nuts. Like, what the hell is this? So I was like, this. I put it on Facebook. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, like, we don't know how this thing started. Like, it's not a conspiracy theory to ask, like, if it could have started in a lab or not. And immediately, 2 reporters from Science Magazine commented on me. Well, Paul.
And tried to shut you down.
Paul, do you know that Trump is doing, like, I don't care what Trump is doing. Exactly. I don't follow Trump. I'm not like some guy, like, I don't, like, spend my day in and day out, like, listening to what Trump does and following him on Twitter. Like, I don't have time for this crap. Why are you obsessed with Trump? Because the people who are obsessed with Trump are MAGA Republicans and lefties. Like, they spend all their day, like, fomenting over Trump. Like, that's not what I do. Like, I just saw an article that said something, and like, this is ridiculous. And, then the idea that, like, because Bannon said something about Trump and blah, 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 I'm like, the people saying the opposite, it's China. Like, it's a huge multinational company, like a country that has, like, huge infrastructure for disinformation. We know this. Like, and you're like, Bannon had something on a podcast? Like, that's your argument? Like, what is this? You know? I mean, it was just...
That's perfect disinformation. Yeah. That's perfect way to, like, gaslight an unsavvy public, right?
And so that was the first thing that made me think, like, okay, what's going on here? Like, what's going on with these editors at Science Magazine? Do they think they're so clever when they're just not, And I've never really had, like, a whole lot to think about people at Science Magazine or Nature Magazine or anything like that. Like, I've always dismissed them as SciComm writers, So, like, I didn't really care that much, but I just thought it was weird. Like, even though I know these people, I was kind of like, okay, SciComm, like, aren't you cute, little psychom? Let me go ruffle your hair. So that was my first sort of intuition that something weird was happening in this space. That there's just some reason, like, why can't you even ask the question? And I think
No, you couldn't.
and then since that time, what we're finding out now is because the reason why the question could be asked is because there were government agencies and nonprofits tied to intelligence groups that were sending requests to social media companies to take certain things down.
Oh yeah.
I wrote a piece for the BMJ about problems with Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine clinical trial. It was all just like based on internal documents and secret recordings and stuff. Like, I spent all this time going through all this crap. Like, it was like 2 weeks of like around the clock reporting, going through all these documents and everything, then interviewing the whistleblower, and the story comes out and there's a fact check on it saying like lacking context. I'm like, what does lacking context mean? Like, you just don't like the story. Like you're not checking facts, you're checking narratives,
Well, and that went on to be one of the most highly cited articles of the year.
It's
right?
the most
it's
the most highly cited article in Altmetric for that year, and it is the most second highly cited article in all of Altmetric.
And were you labeled, for this reporting, were you given labels of like anti-vax or
some of it
right wing, whatever?
Some of it was like just randos. Like, I think Amy Maxman said something about it. Like, it's like you're kind of like, okay, is this real or not? It's Amy Maxman, And then another one was David Gorski, who's this lunatic. He's this lunatic guy who he's just crazy. I mean, he's called pretty much everyone like anti-vax. It's like he calls everyone anti-vax. He called me anti-vax. He called the editors of BMJ anti-vax. And the funny thing is, the bottom of the article, when I got assigned the article, I told my wife, I'm about to go into a pit. Like, I've got all this documents I've got shoved at me, secret recordings. Like, I'm just going to go into a pit and just like be going through stuff, creating timelines, like checking sources and everything. And I was like, it's about this vaccine that like the clinical trial results.
Because I think people may not know what you found and what that report said.
That's what I'll tell you.
Just a little, give some highlights. Okay.
So I'm going through it all, and my wife is like, okay, what's vaccine? And I was like, it's the Pfizer vaccine. She's like, oh, that's the one we got. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh shit, I'd forgotten. Like, I'd forgotten that we had gotten the Pfizer vaccine. Like, but like we got it because that's what Spain offers. That's what Spain bought, or had. And what was found in the documents and in the recordings was one of the biggest places that was seeing patients for the COVID vaccine for Pfizer's clinical trial was just a total chaotic mess. They had people who were doing jobs they just were not trained to do, drawing blood. They were dry labbing stuff, and you could tell because you could see that 13 times in a row, like the thing was spun for 30 minutes exactly. It's like, okay, wait, how did that work? And you could tell there was dry labbing stuff. There was
What does that mean? What is dry labbing?
You don't really, you just put down numbers. Like, maybe you spun it for 25 minutes, maybe you didn't, but you put 30 minutes down,
You guess.
So yeah, okay. You just maybe you did, maybe you didn't do it. So there was also like the most damning thing was when the whistleblower, her job was to oversee like the efficacy of the clinical trial. That was actually her job. So she started like pointing stuff out, like, guys, we're not following protocols, like we're not doing the right thing. And she was being told that like she was acting up for doing that. And it ended up in a meeting with her bosses, and what they didn't know is she recorded it all. And I had the recording.
Oh my God.
And in the recording, she's telling me like, guys, we're not doing things right. Like nothing's like, we're not recording things properly. Like the people are doing blood draws you're not supposed to do. We're not following up on adverse event reports. Like we're just like everything like, and the guy she was, that was listening to her, he's like, hey, look, we know there's problems. We got to figure things out like systematically and fix all this stuff. And he's like, right now we don't have right now, we know it's like a, what do you call it? We know it's a crash on aisle 5. And
Yeah.
He called it on aisle 5, and I was just kind of like, and BMJ took that out because that's Americanism, but like it was just set. So
I lost you.
yeah, so the story was pretty easy to do because it was all document driven, and those are the easiest stories to do. And the other problem is that she was documenting all this stuff, and then she called FDA and reported this, and FDA never investigated. I mean, FDA never went and investigated this clinical trial site,
Yeah.
which is just so insane.
Unbelievable.
It's just like, I mean, that to me was like when I was kind of like, wait, what? Like, I mean, and I went and I contacted FDA for the story, and they came back with, what it is, like the vaccine's safe. I'm like, what? No, that's not the answer. Like someone called you inside the company and said, there's all these problems inside my company, and my job is to report when there's problems, and you never went and investigated. Meanwhile, internally, they were freaking out. They actually had, they were so panicked about FDA showing up. They actually, I couldn't put this in the story because it's really hard to confirm, but they had warning signs inside the company in case FDA showed up and did a crash visit. And what it was is, so they had signs throughout the, hey, go this way down the hallway or sit here for 15 minutes. They were two-sided. So like throughout the place, they were like green. And if anyone saw an FDA person on site, they were to flip them over to make it red so that everyone inside knew that FDA was in the building.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no, they had like a warning system internally.
And then what were they supposed to do? Was there a specific like order that they were supposed to?
Oh, then it was just like make sure everything's cleaned up, like make sure there's like nothing's sitting out properly, make sure patients are being watched properly. Like it was just like a way to like if the food inspector showed up, like at the restaurant, like make sure things are in the freezer, like make sure that like you sweep the floor, like just like fix everything because there's an inspector on site.
Yeah. Wow.
Can I ask you a question, Paul?
Yeah.
So I guess we can go another like 15 minutes or so. Is that okay for you?
That's fine. Yeah.
Do you want to take any questions?
Sure.
So if anyone has a question, just let me know and I'll unmute you. And Paul, you know what? Paul said, he's like, and I agree with this. He's like, you know what? Like trolls are, if you're in a troll, I'll just cut you off. I mean, you can try, but Paul, you don't care if there's a troll.
I don't care. There's always trolls. Like it is what it is.
I know.
Baba, I love trolls. Baba Booey for Howard Stern.
That's right.
It's my favorite troll.
So Paul, I go back real quick because since we only have a little bit of time left to the link here between, if we go back. Okay, so Ray has a question. Let me actually. So there's a couple questions. I'll go to these questions. All right. Here we go. Ray, you are given permission. Let's see. Is he going to troll? What are the odds of trolling?
I don't know.
Paul? What do we think? All right. Well, here he is. Ray, you're on.
Hey, Ray.
Hey, thanks for bringing me up, guys. I appreciate the space.
Sure.
And all your work, Paul, for sure.
Thanks.
I was wondering if you've researched at all the kind of monkey trafficking pipeline that's being used as well in these research facilities.
No, I mean, I haven't looked. I mean, you have to understand, like, I don't do a lot of work on like infectious disease stuff. Like, I mean, in some of these areas, the only things I've done on, it's so funny. Like I did a story many years ago when I first started out in journalism. I was writing for the Emory Report, and I did a story about the Yerkes Center, which is at Emory. It's one of the main primate, I think there's 9 primate centers or whatever. There is so much sensitivity around primate research. It's amazing to me. I mean, it's always been, partly because, especially around chimpanzees, but I think we've started to phase that stuff out. But anything involving monkeys is super, super sensitive because, of course, if you ascribe to this idea that, as you have a more and more complex central nervous system, you have more rights as a species. Like, I mean, the rights of a human are more than a monkey more than a mouse more than a slug, So, and then also the problem also is that these animals carry infectious diseases that can transmit over to humans. Like when I was at Emory right out of college, there was a lab tech who was killed, if I remember correctly, because she got an eye splash from a rhesus macaque when they transfer these animals inside I worked down in the animal facility, as a lab tech at Emory, but I worked in the zebrafish. But I would pass by the monkeys, and when they transmit them, they go into a like a neck lock thing, and then they're on a cart that moves. And as that cart was moving, that monkey urinated, and some of the urine splashed up on the woman woman transmitting him, and it got in her eye, and she got infected, and she died.
Oh my.
Yeah. So there's always these
That's
like
horrific.
really concerns about, not just from an ethics perspective about primate research, but also like an infectious disease issue.
Knuckle, you're on with Paul Thacker.
This is a great space. Thank you so much, Paul, for
Yep.
your time on this. Do you follow Kevin McCarran at all?
No.
He is a genomics researcher that is looking at some of basically the process contamination in these mRNA products. And as you know, the purchase contracts for these mRNA vaccines are tied to Biodefense.
Wait, hold on. Are you going to do a biodefense related thing?
Yeah.
Only because I think the purchase contracts were related
okay.
as Biodefense contracts.
Oh, I see.
And maybe specific to the U.S. I'm not sure about other international places, but in terms of fit and finish and the manufacturing integrity of these products, is that something that's immune from regular standards or regulatory authorities?
Well, I mean, so the thing you have to understand, so there's a guy, I'm blanking on his name right now. He was at Public Citizen. I think he's Pakistani, and he's gone to, I think he's now working in the Senate for one of the Democrats. And this guy did a lot of great work looking at these Pfizer contracts, for the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these contracts were hidden. There's a great documentary on this, Channel 4, which actually they interviewed. So they interviewed me at length for this documentary, and then they interviewed the whistleblower, Brooke, who brought the Pfizer documents to me. But one thing they tracked was the contracts for the Pfizer vaccine, and they all indemnified the manufacturer. Like, this was in every country. These contracts were always hidden, so you didn't know how much you were paying. It was such a scandal, like the way this, which to me is like so funny. Like, you get these knuckleheads with MD PhDs, and they're like, "Oh, like, well, the data tells you." The data doesn't tell you anything. The data was created by the companies. Like, look at these contracts. Like, why are they hiding these contracts from the public? Like, why were these, countries creating contracts that were hidden from the world? And we still don't know why that happened. So in the case of America, I don't know exactly, how some of this stuff, like, there was some weird ways, the way some of these, like Operation Warp Speed was like a joint HHS, I think, DOD thing. But this stuff was put into place. You have to understand, going back like 2 decades ago to shortly after the anthrax attacks and 9/11, when we started to create this biodefense infrastructure, and NIAID totally changed their focus to become what it is today, which is a biodefense research program housed inside the NIH. They're not doing allergy; they do biodefense. People don't want to talk about that. We would have been having a very different conversation if Anthony Fauci had been described as not the medical advisor to the president, but the biodefense advisor to the president. People would have been thinking about things very differently.
Yeah, and not the nation's #1 ID doctor.
Yeah, right.
It's ridiculous, honestly, to the things that he said, to reconcile them with that kind of headline. It's ridiculous.
Can I clarify one thing? And I talked to Paul about this. So the thing is, with regard to the problem, I understand that the vaccine piece is a part of the larger conversation on this. As I think, we've talked in other Twitter spaces about how, Biosafety Now, the goal of our, organization is focused on, dealing with the major immediate concern of gain of function research and biosafety, biorisk. So what happens, of course, is that when the conversation drifts off into vaccines, I'm just clarifying why I jump in and get nervous,
Yeah.
because it is used to undermine this effort. And I know that we have, obviously the members of our group, you know many of the members, they probably had
Right.
disagreements with them about various issues. We talked about this. We talked about the mask stuff. We talked about the vaccine. So it's a different conversation, but certainly with respect to vaccines, it's very related given that we're talking, it's all in the biodefense thing. But when you hear me get like a little jumpy or antsy, I'm just kind of not. I'm just trying to kind of protect another distraction where we're going to get accused of like pushing some anti-vax bullshit. Because the funny
Well, the
thing,
thing you have to understand
yeah,
is, I mean, this whole idea of anti-vax,
I know we
that
talked
is
about
part
this.
of this
Yeah,
whole disinformation
I
thing that's
get
been
it.
popping up. I mean, this has been a long time going.
Right.
And I mean, if you want to understand vaccines and you want to understand biodefense safety, go back
Right.
and look at those early documents. From the early documents,
Right.
you see Anthony Fauci talking about when a pandemic happens, we need to have these government-private partnerships for vaccines and therapeutics. Like, none of this stuff like that happened was like created yesterday. Like, this stuff was put into place years and years and years ago, decades before you were even in grad school. This stuff was being put together.
Me?
You know, yeah.
Wait. You think? When did I start grad school? 2000 and wait, no, 98.
Oh, okay. Well, you're in grad school then. You're in grad school then. Okay.
98, I think. Yeah, I'm old. Yeah, I'm old. It's
Okay. Okay.
ridiculous.
Okay. All right.
You tried
Yeah.
to play
Well,
the age thing. No, I'm old. I
I
act
did.
like a 2-year-old, but I am pretty old.
Okay. So like a lot of this stuff, which I didn't realize, like what I mean, it's like me looking at like, why does Gates care about, you know, virus research, and why does he care about vaccines? Like, what the hell is this all about? Like, and
I know.
why is Fauci like, so caught up in, oh, we have to do virus research, and then we have to have government-private, partnerships on therapeutics and vaccines. It's like you can't talk about one without the other. It's like these stupid conversations we get into, like, well, how do we treat obesity? It's like, well, you can't talk about treating obesity, and so we start talking about how much money we put into agriculture, and like, why are we spending all this goddamn investments into corn,
Well,
create
so
corn
Paul,
syrup, and corn products.
I was just clarifying why I jump in. Like
Right.
I just see it as it's a way of dividing the people in the lab, like the sort of not lab leak, but the anti-gain of function people. There's a lot of people that are like put in the pro-vax camp, and then there's a lot of anti-vax people. If they attack one another, which I've seen, it undermines the whole thing, in my opinion.
Right.
That's part
Right.
of the whole. But let's go. Mentu, is it? Yeah. Wait, Ment. How do you pronounce your name? Mentu? Is that what?
We just go with Kevin. That was my the name for the music that I was making, and I just too lazy to change it. So
Okay.
sorry about that. But
Time for a couple more questions.
awesome. Thank you for having me up, Dana. I'm a big fan. I have your book. I just started that with I think you wrote it with Stephen Phillips, the doctor. I've had long COVID for 3 years, so I'm looking forward to like the road of like certain recovery options and stuff. But anyways, thank you for that.
Oh,
And
thanks. I'm sorry to
yeah,
hear
it's
that.
the worst thing possible. But and Paul, I'm a huge fan of your work. Thank you. You're the first person to call this
Thanks.
the lab leak the hypothesis a non-science problem, which I think is very clear for people or important for people to know.
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, for me, when I realized that it was not a science problem, for me, this goes back to the first, like, that Q&A I did on the Disinformation Chronicle with Alina Chan. And once she started walking me through all this stuff, and like, this woman's competent in science, she understands, how this research functions and everything. I mean, she's a bench scientist, so she understands a lot of that, what's going on with, how genetics are used and everything. And like, once I heard her explain this stuff, and then she started focusing on all these conflicts of interest, the thing you have to understand is, like, science only gives you so much, right? And then after a while, it's like, it's not a science argument, and a lot of these scientists are like, but the data shows, like, no, the data doesn't show anything. Like, go back and look at the biggest conspiracy we had in modern America. It was tobacco.
Right.
It went on for half a century, right? Started in the 1950s with Hill and Knowlton, working with the tobacco companies to harness academic research to basically create this idea that tobacco is not harmful. Now, who told us that tobacco was harmful? It wasn't some guy with an MD, PhD. It was the lawyers that sued tobacco and got the documents. You know, the guys who told us that Avandia really was dangerous, it wasn't some guy with an MD, PhD. That was me, like going through the documents and making those documents public. So when you hear people talk about, well, the data shows, what they're doing is they're trying to create a science fight because they want to fight on that area because that's where they think they can win and because they know it's not about science. This is about money, and it's about getting documents and seeing what people did and when they knew it.
We're going to go with how many more questions you want to take. I just want to, I know you want to get to the bar. So what do you
no, that's fine. That's fine. Like, I'm good now. Like, let's just keep going.
Okay.
I have 15 minutes. I have 15 minutes. I don't have.
Okay. All right. So we've got, let's go with Bo. Is that how you?
Bo? Okay. And then can we go to Jill Buchwald?
Yeah. They're both speakers now. So go ahead.
Oh, hi. This is Bo. Thank you so much. I didn't think I'd get on, so I have to try to collect my thoughts while I'm thinking them.
But thank you for all your amazing work in Lyme. I'm really appreciative of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, as you can tell by my moniker, borreliosis. But I've been working on this issue of Lyme disease for about 8 or 9 years now. And my colleague and I, my colleague scored a meeting at the FDA in person in October 2021. We were there for about 3 hours and we presented to 2 investigators who were there live. I should mention this came out of a complaint to the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. During that time, what we proved to them was that the original diagnostic tests for Lyme disease that were cleared back in the 90s after what we call so lovingly the Dearborn Conference were improperly cleared. And the investigators in the room agreed with us. We had an attorney, not in the room, but he joined remotely, and there was an indeterminate number of other FDA staff who were on the meeting remotely.
Okay,
and we only know this.
Can I step in for a second? But what is the question?
Yeah. So I don't know your full background on Lyme disease, but we have lawyers. We will have a lawsuit coming out in a couple months that we can't really talk about yet. But in terms of dealing with the FDA to kind of force the issue, I would love to know what you suggest.
Well, okay, so it's interesting you bring up the Office of Criminal Investigation. So just so you know, OCI was created by Congress after there was a FDA scandal called, and it was called the generic drug scandal. And this was investigated by Congressman Dingell, I want to say back in the 90s. What was going on is there were people inside FDA who were taking payoffs. So the way it works is there's after a brand drug has been on the market for a certain time, depending upon what the law is, you can then introduce generics. But the generics have to get approved. So what was going on is these FDA people were taking payoffs to not get these drugs approved or to get like other generics approved before other ones were. And this created a huge scandal. And as part of this, there was created this internal police force called Office of Criminal Investigation. The guy that ran it was a former Secret Service guy who I got fired because he was incompetent, and was also like gave his girlfriend a job or something. I can't remember. Like on the way out the door, there's like more crap hitting him in the head. But he was not cooperative with the committee, and so it took me a couple of years, but I actually got him fired. In the Pfizer COVID-19 clinical trial, when that was first brought up, the person they brought in as a special witness was the woman who ran OCI. So she's in charge of OCI. This is about like 160 1811s, which means they're badged, badge and guns federal agents. A lot of them are retired from other agencies. She said that she had never seen this kind of corruption before, like what she saw in the Pfizer clinical trial. This was her statement, like that was entered into the court. And nothing's happened to OCI. I have no clue what OCI does to this day. Like having gotten the former guy who ran it, the guy who started it up and got it ran, forcing him out and getting him fired, and then seeing the woman who took his job, like her saying that the Pfizer vaccine stuff that was uncovered by Brooke showed like a huge amount of corruption. The FDA was complicit in it. So like I can't tell you about like what OCI does. I honestly don't know. Like all of my interactions with OCI have not been good. Starting with getting the guy who ran it fired, and then seeing this, what happened with the woman who took it over from him, what happened with her on the Pfizer COVID-19 clinical trial. So I don't have any advice on that.
All right, we're going to go to Jill. Jill?
Hi. Paul, thank you so much for your candor and honesty. It's so great to hear someone so smart talking about this.
Oh, thanks.
And I was just wondering if you could say more about the Gates connection that you sort of happened upon and what you think it's all about.
Well, I mean, the first one, to the guy who did a lot of this stuff, his name I'm blanking right now. It's T. I'm blanking on his name. There's a great piece in The Nation, and there was another one I think in CJR written by the same reporter, looking at all the Gates money. And the thing you have to understand is like if you go back and look at Gates, like when I was in college in the 90s, I was a bio major, right? And I was at UC Davis, which is like a science geek school. And I had a lot of my friends were, they were much more harder science than me, like, chem engineers and stuff like that. And they were all into computers and I wasn't, I was just like, all I wanted a computer to do was just to work. That's why I have an Apple now. I don't give a shit about how computers work anymore. I care about how a car works. Like, it's like I put gas in it, I check the tires and like, let's go. But these guys were super into computers. They built their own computers, blah, 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 blah. And they all hated Gates. Gates was just known as a monster inside to everyone who was like a computer geek, because what he did was he didn't invent anything. He just bought other people off, and or ran people out of business. And there's a huge antitrust lawsuit against him. And what he's done is he's taken all his money and totally done like a complete makeover of himself. Where now, he's talking about climate change, but like if you look at climate change experts, they'll tell you he doesn't have the good solutions on it. Then he talks about how vaccines work and like how do we do protection on pandemics, and then the experts in pandemics like, yeah, but that's not really true, And then he's like a food expert also, like promoting GMOs, and people are like, but that's not really good. So he has all these solutions to all these problems that when you talk to the experts in those areas, they're like, yeah, that's not it. So one of the things that he's done is all this work on infectious diseases and vaccines. Like, I don't know what it means or what the whole thing's about, but if you go and look, the reason why he gets positive news all the time is because he's funding a ton of media out there, NPR. I don't know, who, Guardian. I don't know who out there is not taking Gates money. And so he's created this situation in which he's managed to buff his image by funding all these media outlets, nonprofits. I mean, it's hard to find someone who's not funded by Gates to make Gates look good. Meanwhile, his nonprofit has investments in issues that he's invested in, that he's promoting through his nonprofits. These are two really good articles Timothy Schwab wrote, one in The Nation and one in CGR. And so I think you should check those out. He's writing a book on Gates right now. I just got a message from him a month ago, that he's drowning trying to finish this book. So.
All right, we're going to go to Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I heard Paul mention years and years ago. I was wondering in that context if you've heard of the Sam Husseini and Jonathan Latham article, Did West Africa's Ebola outbreak of 2014 have a lab origin? Because they are the most astonishing parallels to SARS-CoV-2. And and the same actors being in place. You, for instance, have a in Sierra Leone, which is where the Ebola outbreak occurred. There is a you've heard about that?
Well, so I've heard something about it. I didn't read their article, but like, I mean, I saw this floating around on Twitter, and I was kind of like, what is this all about? And I asked around, and what someone told me was that the person who said, aha, that couldn't possibly have happened, was a guy everyone's heard about on the lab leak issue, a guy named Michael Warby. So apparently Michael Warby is the guy who, published this study in Science saying it couldn't have possibly come from a lab.
Wait, are you talking? I think you're talking about something else, not the Ebola one. So I think you're
let me clarify.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the HIV thing. But can I point something out with regard to this?
Okay.
So one battle at a time is the one, the one battle at a time mantra here. I'm hesitant. So I wonder if we could have a larger discussion about that. I don't know, because Paul's saying he just kind of has seen it on Twitter. I think it's worth having a larger discussion about that, but I would be hesitant right now to have a discussion about something that I don't really know. I read that article too, and I guess it's certainly there are questions, right? But it's perhaps going to become problematic to again go into that while we're still not doing the COVID thing. But go ahead, Gregor. Say what you.
Thank you. I mean, the excuse they had for their presence, this viral hemorrhagic fever consortium that was coincidentally headed by Robert F. Gary, and with the vice director being Christian Anderson. You know, the guys from the Proximal Origin hack job. So,
did you see the Ryan Grimm video on this and stuff? I mean,
I saw it. It was as weak as Ryan Grimm usually is, because they actually brought some kind of audio, and in that audio, Anderson actually contradicts Gary. Gary previously said in 2022, no Ebola research was being done, it was all just Lasser, blah, blah, blah. And in that audio, Anderson actually contradicts Gary by saying, yeah, we totally did Ebola research there, and it's basically the same people, and it most likely looks like a lab leak from the Kinema lab, and they already covered it up back then, together with Holmes, with Rambo.
Hold on. So again, these are right now, there are people that have made these accusations, right? And I understand, and I had pointed out, I tweeted something about when you do, and what I've, very publicly said, and I will say here, looks like a lot of lying to the public in the wake of COVID, and you pretend that this is normal science, you then will undoubtedly open yourself up to a lot of questions about every single thing that you have ever been involved in previously. I'm extremely hesitant, certainly here on the Biosafety Now platform, to really have a very casual conversation about that without bringing in people that know a lot more about that Ebola issue. So I do appreciate that a lot of people have been talking about it, and I do appreciate that there are a lot of questions with relation to the story that was put out there. But I really am uncomfortable placing blame on Gary and Anderson, for that, given we're still dealing with the COVID piece of this, right? And I understand why people are very upset and why they're pointing fingers at them here in the Ebola thing. And I honestly do want to have a larger conversation about it. And actually, if you wanted to participate in that or something, we can see. But again, here is we are in a fight against a huge special interest group that's looking for any misstep we do here. They'll amplify it, right? If we come in here and make accusations that we cannot support, they'll amplify it and they will call us crazy, as you saw they did with the woman that said 100% of BSL-3 labs are doing bioweapons research. So I'm a little bit lazy myself sometimes, but at the end of the day, I think everyone here is on the same page with what we would like to see, which is full transparency, honesty, and we would like to have a real investigation about some things. And but that's why not cutting everything off. I just am being very. This one in particular, I want to be very careful about. Same. I thought you were also the Warby thing. I thought related to the AIDS, the thing about AIDS being caused by.
Oh, right. You're right. You're right. Yeah,
So
you're
so
right. You're
that
right.
one too. Like again, I understand. I've seen all the information out there. I have not looked into it. I need, there's the whole. Dana and I were talking about it. It's there. There's. I don't even know where to begin on that.
Okay,
So
can I just conclude diplomatically?
yes, please do.
Okay, so I'm just saying, if you read the Sam Husseini and
I did.
Jonathan Latham
Yeah.
article, you will find astonishing parallels to the SARS-CoV-2 case and origin, and
I agree.
yeah,
I
that's
agree.
what
I
I'm saying.
agree with you. I totally agree. He's so amazing. He's amazing.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, and I know. Like look, yeah. You see, you hear my voice. It's not that I'm uncomfortable. It's an organization with 27 people in it, right? So I'm not going to speak on behalf of everybody here, and the
Yeah,
organization itself is not taking a position about that Ebola thing at
yeah.
all. Right? So
Okay.
we're very clear. We've got a mission statement on the website. But we really do want the public to have transparency, honesty, and if there are questions that haven't been resolved, yes, we need to look at that. And the other thing this points out is this whole angle of environmental injustice, which is if you do have labs and they're running in countries, and you have outbreaks in those countries linked to the lab, right? Like there's a whole other piece to that, with respect to that angle. So anyway, I do appreciate, Gregor, your question. So let me go
Thank you.
all right, thank you. Let me go. Paul,
I
how are
think
you doing?
we got to wrap up in a few minutes, I think.
All right,
But go on.
we'll do two more questions, short ones.
Sounds good. Ask
Jackie
them to
Jones.
ask them to talk about the things that I wrote about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Paul, do you want to just, are there things that you want to say before we go that would be
Well, the one
relevant?
thing I think a lot of people is let's kind of wrap up and all this sort of the one thing I think that people I don't think quite understand is what's really going to get us to the end here is Congress running a competent investigation, which I don't necessarily know if that's what they're going to do. We're in the early months of this so far, so I hope that we're going to get some good things. But I think to me, I wrote this piece. I've advised a couple different congressional investigators about what they should be looking at. I do know that some academics have already gotten letters. I don't know if you guys saw or not. There was a recent anger tweet from EcoHealth Alliance. There's conspiracies, blah, blah, blah. People are asking questions, blah, 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 blah. Letters have gone out the door to academics. And they're going to be pulled into meetings. They're not going to be, in front of the cameras. They're going to be, Mr. Clever Guy who, has a couple 100,000 followers on Twitter and thinks he's the smartest guy that's ever gone through medical school is going to have a chance to show how smart he is. And I've been in those meetings and it's not fun for those people. It's going to be them, Mr. Clever Guy, his $800 an hour attorney, and sitting across the table is a really humorless guy like me who, believe it or not, my mom used to tell me I was a really smart guy too when I was a kid, and this is how we're going to get to the answers here. It's not going to be another study published in Science Magazine. That's stupid. Another, I had a thought that, some guy sneezed and a raccoon dog farted in a market, and I'm going to tell the Atlantic this. And, then they're going to peer review my thought in the Atlantic. And then after they peer reviewed my thought in the Atlantic, then the New York Times is going to run a story about the fact that the Atlantic peer reviewed my idea and I don't have a preprint yet. It's going to be through these, ugly conversations in the basement of, Longworth Building, out in the Ford Building, with people under oath, hopefully with court reporters in there or people filming these people as they try to lie and get away from the fact of what they did. And that's how we're going to get to where we're going to find out what really happened or, what was uncovered. I just want to get people think back to the very beginning. At the very beginning of when all this started, we had 3 papers that dishonestly misled people to think the lab leak was not possible, right? We had an article that appeared in Emerging Microbes and Infections that called it a conspiracy theory to say it could have come from a lab. And then we find out later that paper, that essay, was secretly edited by Ralph Barrick, secretly edited by Shizing Li. No disclosure of that. Taylor and Francis has done nothing to fix that. We had this crappy article, essay that appeared in The Lancet that was misleading, that was carefully orchestrated behind the scenes by Peter Daszak. The Lancet has taken some action on that. Peter Dass, and then they end up having to shut down the Lancet's COVID Origins Commission. And then the other one we have is this, article that appeared in Nature Medicine, which is, again, another pleading piece that, totally reversed what Anderson and others thought about the possibility of a lab accident. We know now that Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci were involved in helping to orchestrate that piece. After it came out, Francis Collins then posted it on his NIH Leaders blog. And Anthony Fauci, when Trump was stepped aside from the White House days, Anthony Fauci stepped up to spread this crap to reporters at the White House. So we had a very clear orchestrated cover-up to misdirect people into how this pandemic started. And the way we're going to figure out what really happened is, again, it's not going to be a study that Holden Thorpe's going to jump up and down and tweet about on Twitter. Science Magazine did a new piece, or Ben Mueller gets to write about in the New York Times. It's going to be these subpoenas, people going through documents, people sworn under oath and being deposed. And that's how we're going to find out what happened. There's a pretty clear process for this. So
you don't get on Paul's bad side. If you didn't hear it earlier, Jackie, you're going to ask the last question here. Paul's fired up. Don't get in Paul's way watching the game at the bar if anyone's there, because Paul's fired up.
We're 18 minutes into the game. So.
Oh shit, Jackie,
okay.
Please.
No, yeah.
Well, let me tell you, you guys just lost so badly, so badly. You need to look at Africa. Look at Africa's data. We know how to treat Ebola. We know how to treat Marburg. We know how to treat COVID. They're all RNA viruses. And if you want to inhibit an RNA virus, you use a zinc ionophore. And hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, ivermectin, doxycycline, quercetin, all inhibit RNA viruses. And I've posted a link to you guys. And I can tell you right now that we don't actually pay any attention to the academics in the first world, particularly the WHO, because we know how to treat this stuff. There are African solutions to African problems. And we've eliminated Ebola very quickly in 2 months.
But hey, Jackie, can I ask you a question?
Yep, go ahead.
Can you take your speech, sermon, soliloquy and put it in the form of a question?
Okay, I'll put a question to you. Why are you scared of Ebola?
Oh, wait, was that for me or for Paul? No, I just said we weren't ready to have the Ebola conversation in this. I would rather have some people on that I had known that
actually know something about Ebola.
I'll back out now, but all I'm saying is that it's irrelevant whether they're bioweapons or not. What you need is a solution. And Ebola is no different to COVID. There is an viral replication phase.
Solution. Sorry, I'm very confused because So Paul came on to talk about biodefense and stuff. So I'm confused. You're talking about medical solutions for these
100%.
diseases, right?
So
we don't know too much about that. At least personally, I don't. Paul might.
I don't.
Yeah.
Okay,
so I don't know.
I didn't spend a lot of time looking at this stuff.
I've just popped into the space, and my feeling is that if somebody has got a weapon, then what you need is a shield. And if there's a universal shield, then you take away the fear, in which case you disable the opponent.
Right.
Right. So you're talking, without the analogies, I think, I mean, what we are advocating for are measures that would reduce the amount of weaponry out there, if we're going to use that analogy, I guess. But those, we're just starting, how 3 years into this pandemic, there have been no changes in, actually, it's even worse. There's more of a push to build more and more of these high containment bio.
No, they
that's the
actually
problem.
they introduced ARPA-H, which was more money.
I think maybe what Dr. Jackie Stone is talking about too just speaks to all cheap generic drugs being discredited throughout the world. And I understand this very well because this is an area I've been very concerned about, and we wrote a lot about in our book. And I completely agree with her that there are some treatments out there. I don't know about Ebola, but I know for COVID that have been discredited, just things that are not controversial, like metformin, which is a cheap generic drug, and fluvoxamine, again, like cheap old drugs we know a lot about that have activity, and they're not being promoted, even though there's really good data supporting their value for COVID. And so I understand, I think, partly what she's getting at, which is
So Dana, we're going to have to wrap up.
Right, sounds good.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thanks everyone for having me on. I hope this helped a little bit. Come follow me on my Substack. Follow me on Twitter.
By the way, Paul,
rolling out some stuff. Like, it's all I can say right now.
And Paul, you have an open invitation anytime you want. If you want us to set something up for you, you come back in. Next week, we're going to have Michael Balter on, who's going to talk also about media manipulation with respect to the origin issue. That should be good. That'll be Wednesday night next week. Dana, any last words?
No, just thank you, Paul. You're awesome. We really appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks, guys.
Paul.
Okay,
take care, everybody.
Later.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.